I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opposition believes that education should never become a financial trap disguised as opportunity, because while proposition tries to package student loans as accessibility, what they are actually doing is normalizing debt as the price of survival in modern society. And this is deeply dangerous in a country like Indonesia, where unemployment is high, wages are unstable, and job opportunities are extremely limited. War proposition essentially tells students today that they may not afford university now, but do not worry, they can owe the government for years instead. That is absolutely not empowerment. That is desperation with just with better branding. In this speech, I'm going to do three things. Firstly, I will contextual why debt-based education systems are harmful in developing economies like Indonesia. Secondly, prove to you why student loans create long-term financial pressure without solving the real structural issues behind inaccessible education. And thirdly, I will show you why proposition's mechanism is unrealistic because it depends entirely on assumption the Indonesian government cannot guarantee. That is top-level framing. The reality is yes, university in Indonesia are expensive. Yes, scholarships are limited and competitive. And yes, many middle-income students are stuck because they are not poor enough for aid but not rich enough to comfortably pay tuition. But the proposition team themselves already admit the root issue. Education in Indonesia is overpriced, even often not proportional to the quality of facilities provided. This matters massively because the proposition team never actually solves that problem. They do not reduce tuition fee, they do not regulate university pricing, they just simply normalize debt so students can survive inside a broken system. That is like seeing a leaking ship, and instead of fixing the hole, you just give passengers the bucket. So judge, the metric of this debate is simple. Which side creates sustainable educational access without sacrificing long-term financial welfare? And on that metric, opposition clearly wins. So moving on to my first substantive. Why student loans create systemic financial harm? The thesis here is simple. That changed the way young people live and survive. Firstly, proposition says repayment only starts once student gets job and income. This actually sounds comforting emotionally, but it changed nothing because debt is still debt at the end of the day. Students still graduate knowing that they owe the government money that they borrow, their future income is already partially owned, and their survival now depends on securing employment quickly. This creates massive anxiety, especially in Indonesia, where job opportunities is already extremely limited and many jobs have ridiculous requirements despite the low salaries. And opposition asks a very simple question. How can proposition guarantee jobs for every student loan recipient? They simply cannot. Secondly, proposition assumes that if the government wants students to repay loans, then the government will create more better workflow, or more job opportunities. This is their biggest logical leap. Because wanting something does not mean being capable of doing it. Indonesia has struggled with underemployment for years, even without a national student loan scheme. So why we suddenly believe that the government can magically provide stable jobs for millions of graduates? Their entire mechanism depends on perfect government execution, and that is extremely unrealistic. Thirdly, proposition tells you student loans are more sustainable than scholarships because eventually the money comes back to the government. But this only works if repayment actually succeeds. And opposition fundamentally rejects this assumption because many graduates right now struggle to find jobs. They work on stable contracts. They receive salaries too low to survive comfortably. Meaning repayment is not guaranteed at all. And once repayment fails, proposition's entire sustainability argument just collapses. Because now, the government has already funded university. distributed loans, and expanded spending, but the money never properly returns. This creates two massive harms. Firstly, students become financially trapped. When graduates cannot repay loans, they may delay payments, accumulate debt stress, or they can even borrow from pinjol just to survive daily expenses. Meaning that the proposition does not create upward mobility, they create a generation trapped between unemployment and debt dependency. Secondly, this becomes a national economic burden. If a large number of graduates fail repayment, the government absorbs huge financial losses. Eventually, there are only two outcomes: either taxes increase for other people, or public spending gets cut elsewhere. So, proposition does not eliminate economic burden. They merely delay and redistribute it until it becomes a national problems. Now, moving on to my second substantive, why proposition's model is structurally flawed. Firstly, proposition assumes the government can just efficiently track repayments, but in reality, Indonesia still struggles with weak bureaucracy, inaccurate welfare databases, tax issues, and huge informal labor sectors. So, how exactly will the government consistently monitor graduate income nationwide? Their mechanisms sound neat in theory, but the reality is administrative chaos. Secondly, proposition's bond system is deeply coercive. They essentially say, we fund your education, therefore you owe your labor to the country. But talented individuals leave Indonesia because opportunities and wages abroad are much better there than here. So instead of improving domestic conditions, proposition traps people contractually. And this can backfire badly because students may resent the government or even work jobs they hate simply just to fulfill the obligations. Now, before weighing, let's identify the biggest flaw in proposition's framing. Their policy only works in a fantasy Indonesia where jobs are widely available, wages are stable, and government execution is perfect. But that is not Indonesia we live in today. The reality is, graduates already struggle, workers are already underpaid, and unemployment already exists massively. So adding large-scale debt into this unstable system is incredibly dangerous. So when we weigh this debate, opposition clearly wins. For all that reasons, the opposition team is proud to oppose.